over 7 million different animals inhabit our planet.
In India, I met farmers whose crops have been literally washed away by historic flooding. In America, I have witnessed unprecedented droughts in California. In Greenland and in the Arctic, I was astonished to see that ancient glaciers are rapidly disappearing, well ahead of scientific predictions. All that I have seen and learned on my journey has absolutely terrified me.
So the question now is whether we will have the courage to act before it's too late. And how we answer will have a profound impact on the world that we leave behind, not just to you, but to your children and to your grandchildren. As a president, as a father, and as an American, I'm here to say we need to act.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
All right, welcome to All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris.
Hey, it's Jesse.
Jesse! Oh no! Where's Angie again?
You know how she likes to take her holidays?
I know. She just told me, she's like, man, he's too good. You just have Jesse and no, she's away this week again. It's summertime up there in the great north, I guess, of the U.S., right?
Yeah, summertime. Yeah, there was snow on the mountain just outside of town this morning. I wasn't really delighted to see that.
It's cold here. It is cold here. And so she's on holiday again, and she'll be back next week when we do our new species. But, Jesse was kind enough to step in again, and it's great to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's great to have you.
I'm glad I passed the interview.
Oh, yeah, of course. Jeez, yeah. Angie's worried. You're going to replace one of us, or we'll just do a three-way show sometimes. That's actually a good idea. We'll have to bring you in for, like, giraffes and stuff, some of these species that you've worked with.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah. So the week in news, a lot of different stuff that, you and I all week have been kind of going back and forth on.
Yep.
But I really wanted to open with a feel-good story. And this species is on our radar. Angie and I actually have some things in the works trying to secure a big interview before we cover them. But that's the mountain gorilla. And
right.
Yeah, amazing. I cannot wait one of these days to get out there to Central Africa and go on these tours and see these things in the wild. I cannot wait.
It would be a real highlight, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah. Like Erin Curry, she's one of the interviews we did with the polar bear research. Mm-hmm. She actually went, her fiance, soon to be husband, is a gorilla expert, and so he took her out there. Right. I think he proposed, out there in the jungle.
Oh, that's bold.
Yeah, next to the gorillas. But she had some pictures. I was so jealous. So anyways, the good news, this week coming out of The Guardian, and the headline is Mountain Gorilla Population Rises Above 1,000.
Whoa.
So it's good news.
Yeah,
it's good
big
news.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the subheadline is new total represents an increase of 25% since 2010 in its Central African heartland where they're at. So
wow.
Just to sum this up, the mountain gorilla populations are increasing, and this is the only large primate where the populations are increasing, which is good news. Yeah. So, because I can't really jump into the whole species thing, but just to kind of tell the listeners about, the plight of the gorillas, because I remember reading a research paper, this is, 7 years ago, probably, looking at gorilla populations. And it was really interesting because I didn't know. I thought, all the gorillas were like desperately endangered, very few left. And that's actually not.
Well, that's the story we've been told. Yep.
Yeah. And it's not completely true. Now, they're all critically endangered. So that's not good. Right. I mean, it's not good. But there's really two major species of gorilla, the Western gorilla and the Eastern gorilla. Mm-hmm. So the Western gorilla, there's still a population of a couple 100,000. which is good.
Okay.
That's good. But they're still
That's
critically
Yep.
Yeah. But they're still critically endangered because they've suffered an 80% population reduction in 3 generations, which is insane. Like,
that's drastic.
Yes. So
Very
that's
drastic.
why they're classified as critically endangered. So they're in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
The mountain gorilla. So this is part of the eastern gorilla family. These are the ones that just a few years ago, the number was like 700-800. And so to see a population of 1,000, that's really good news. That's really good news.
That's a great benchmark. Yeah.
Yeah. That the conservation efforts are working. You know, they live in Uganda. It's, highly contentious area of the planet. And, I know once we cover gorillas, we'll go more into them. But, just to start off with some good news, that the gorillas are kind of rebounding a little bit. I mean, still have quite a bit of poaching problems with them, but, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't come without a cost. I know I've read a little bit into it, and the National Park Virunga, which is one of the places where mountain gorillas can be found, I believe it's 160 rangers have lost their lives over the years protecting not just the gorillas, but the entire park. So while this is great news, it's important to recognize the cost that it's come at and how much investment the local people themselves have put into this. And to see this coming forward, and because most wildlife populations are declining right now, and so to see something improving, it's really great to see.
Yeah, and kind of an umbrella species for that region too.
Oh, so iconic.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some other species benefiting from the work there. And you're right. Like there was a story in April where 6 of the guards that were guarding the mountain gorillas were killed.
Yeah.
So these poachers are pretty sophisticated, and the anti-poaching people are very sophisticated too. And luckily, they're getting more funding. But so it's actually good news. So we just got to keep our eye on it and see how this goes. And then for sure, when we cover the gorilla, in the next, I would say within the next 2 months for sure, it will be one of the episodes we release. Yeah. It's that close. We just got to secure this interview we're hoping to get with somebody big, hopefully. So, Angie, if you're listening, keep working.
Well, Chris, I've also got a little bit of news I found about counting animals. And so this is kind of along the same lines of what they've seen with the mountain gorillas. In order to identify how many of these animals we have, you've got to do surveys. And the ability to do surveys and the techniques that are being used keep getting more sophisticated over time. Well, one of the easiest ways to survey animals is through camera traps, which is basically motion sensor cameras. And so you come up with a grid of an area, and you put out these camera traps strategically, and you just let them out there for a period of time and then collect all of this film, this footage back. And then the hard part comes, in which you have to sit in front of a computer for hours going through every single bit of footage and counting animals. So this is an easier way because you don't have to be in the field as long, and you have something out there monitoring long term. And a lot of scientists have actually gotten a lot of great data out of this. Not only seeing encouraging signs of increased populations, but finding species they didn't know existed in certain areas. So one of these new techniques is actually taking artificial intelligence and letting it review the footage. So one of the data sets they tested this with was out of Serengeti National Park. They have over 200 camera traps set up, and they've been out there since 2011. So they've been collecting data for 7 years now. Originally, it took 2 to 3 months for volunteers, so citizen scientists, people at home. They've got software where you can set up and look through all the pictures, and you can identify them yourself. So it took 2 to 3 months for these volunteers to identify and label 6 months worth of images from this data set. Now, what they did is they took 7 years worth of data and gave it to this AI system that they had trained and given it algorithms. It took the AI system just a few hours to go through 3.2 million images.
Wow.
And it was just as accurate as humans. And to give you an idea of the scale, this approach that they took saved 17,000 people work hours. So it would have taken
Wow.
over 17,000 hours for someone to go through all of this information, and it took just a few hours for the AI system. To give you even more perspective, the average person who works a 40-hour week works just over 2,000 hours a year. So if it took 17,000 hours to look at all this data and the average person works 2,000, that's a lot of effort. And so this new technology is making the ability to count animals and to monitor animals so much more efficient. The fact that we'll be probably getting more news, just like the mountain gorillas, because we're getting this information back and it's being processed so quickly.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that's
Isn't it?
It brings up a lot. Like, is AI going to replace us? But
yes, indeed.
Who knows where we'll be in 100 years? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you were talking about that, and it triggered something. I remember before I moved to New Zealand, moved down here. Angie and I were actually talking to a researcher who was doing chinchilla trap studies.
Okay.
And so, she just asked me and Angie about behavior and some of the work we did at UF. And so she was doing camera traps of chinchilla. I think in Argentina is where her traps were.
Which, by the way, are on the endangered species list. They are highly endangered, despite being found throughout the pet trade. Wild chinchillas are very endangered animals. So this is actually pretty big, important work.
What she was doing, it was pretty crazy. But then it brought me back to the gorillas, because I remember reading that study. I was like, well, one of the questions I had was, how do they identify 200,000 gorillas? How do they do these estimates? And from what I remember, the study was they would go and count nesting sites, where they would build beds or look at feces and things like that to get an okay estimate. But you're right, these camera traps are much more efficient. Now you have an AI system. My God, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really
Who knows
awesome.
the amount of information we're going to receive in just a short period of time. That's a lot of money for conservation actually goes into just counting animals, because it's a very basic thing that has to be done. But it costs so much money because all the time spent in the field that someone's got to survey these animals. And so if we can reduce the amount of money it takes to actually survey these animals, we could put a lot of that money into actually preserving land, restoring land, reintroducing animals into the wild, rather than just counting them all the time. So this is really, really big news.
Well, and just to add another thing too, here in New Zealand, Goja, our friend, she's Canadian, so shout out to Goja if she's listening. She also works for the New Zealand government, and so she was looking at doing research in AI that could actually identify behaviors. Ooh. And she's doing goats, like that's her big thing is goat behavior and goat welfare. And so she's trying to work with a computer guy in Australia to design this AI system that could actually identify unique behaviors, which is crazy.
Well, that's actually with this piece of news that came out about this AI. It actually showed a picture of the computer data coming up, and it actually shows a picture of two zebras, and it's got the identification of the zebra. It's got the count, and then it's got what it calls additional attributes. And under this, it says standing, not resting, not moving, not eating, not interacting, babies. So it's already trying to get the AI algorithms to consider all of these things and pick it up, so that all this processing that they're doing, they can use that data for something else later. So it's definitely already happening, and it could be further enhanced for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's I can't even begin to understand how it does it. But
totally.
I understand biology. I understand animal behavior. I don't understand computer stuff like that. No. So, no, that's good news. That's good news. Well, not to be the party pooper for the listeners, but this week, and I only bring this story up because we just got to stay vigilant, and it's just kind of a reminder to the listeners that we all need to do our part. But coming out of Thailand, and hopefully, a lot of people heard about this, but there was a pilot whale that was just kind of floundering off the coast, and people, saw this whale in distress, and so they went and brought him in, and it eventually died. So they weren't able to save this whale. It was seriously sick, and despite veterinarians and everything, they just couldn't do anything for it. So what they did on the necropsy is they pulled out 80 plastic bags from its stomach, and it just it was its body was just full of plastic garbage
Wow.
that it had been eating in the ocean. And I know Angie and I brought it up in a few pods ago where we talked about the sperm whale off Spain that I think it had like 60 or 70 kilograms or maybe it's just pounds in its stomach.
That's a lot.
Yeah, they're finding, yeah. So these whales, mammals, pretty intelligent, are eating, this plastic thinking it's part of their diet or prey.
Plastic bags floating in the water. It's just like squid.
Yeah. And so
different, or jellyfish. Yeah.
My question is, how many of these whales do we never see? How many of these fish, turtles, birds that, are ingesting this plastic and they die and we just don't see it ever, So again, it's just kind of a reminder to the listeners, we need to, reduce our plastic use and avoid it at all costs. And then when you do use it, try to recycle it. And I know, the U.S., other countries maybe aren't the problem, but we are the global leaders in a lot of things. And so when the public demands it, like you're seeing no straws here in New Zealand now.
Yep.
You go to our McDonald's and they're like, well, we're only going to give you a straw if you ask. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of different countries are going, straw-free or plastic-free, things like that. So I think when it starts in the United States and Europe and Australia and New Zealand, those countries of the world, it will trickle down to other countries.
Oh, totally.
Because we can invest in, biodegradable plastics. Like last week, we brought up the biodegradable 6-pack ring that they're developing for a beer company in Florida. So, we push innovation. And so if the consumer demands it, the businesses are going to listen and follow suit. And then the rest of the world hopefully will follow suit.
It's just a domino effect. And it all starts with just one person changing their behavior.
Yeah. Like, how was it in New Caledonia? I mean, what was it? I know you were just there a few weeks ago. So insight into a small island nation.
Well, because it's a small island nation, they're actually a territory of France. So technically I went to the country of France. They're not their own separate country. And they're still behind a bit because they're working so hard. Many of those people there are still working towards independence and gaining that ability to be their own country. But even there, plastic bags, because a lot of their local industries rely on the reef. The reef around New Caledonia is the second largest in the world, just behind the Great Barrier Reef, just across the sea from them. And there's a huge fishery there in New Caledonia. There's a lot of tourism based off the reefs there. And so they are making some effort to get rid of their single-use plastics. I know walking around, traveling through the country, a lot of people had giant reusable bags that they got from the grocery store. There were very few people walking around with just those single-use bags that you normally get. So they're already making those changes, and they're a small country because they realize the impact they have. Here in New Zealand, it seems like every other day there's a bit in the news about some company going plastic-free or changing the type of plastics they use. Because when it comes to our wildlife, we're probably the center for diversity of not just marine mammals, but marine birds as well. And even though this pilot whale had all of these bags inside of it, what we didn't see was all the little tiny pieces of plastic, because as the plastic degrades in the environment, it just turns into smaller and smaller pieces. And every fish that you and I eat actually has bits of plastic inside of it too that we're probably consuming as well.
I know. Ugh.
It's just going right back into the food chain, and it's just going to keep moving around.
I know.
And that stuff never
all these
disappears.
Chemicals and just it's got to change. It's got to change. And it's just I can't wait to get back to the States and see, where we are in the plastic fight, because it just seems like since I've left, it's gotten bigger and bigger, and I just don't know if that's just because it's a big deal here in New Zealand and elsewhere in the world, or is it just everywhere? Like people are finally waking up. So maybe the listeners can let us know, because it's such a huge problem for the ocean health. It's just so huge. Yeah. I've got a really cool story coming up that I cannot wait to talk to you about. But what was something else that you found this week that was kind of a hot topic?
Well, given I live here in New Zealand with you, a very big topic within the New Zealand news was the increase on hut tickets for international tourists. Now, a little bit of context to that. A hut in New Zealand is basically what it sounds like. It's a hut in the middle of the woods. It's maintained and generally built by the Department of Conservation, which manages all of the conservation public lands in New Zealand. And just as you would go camping with a tent and with your sleeping bag in New Zealand, because we have such this big hut culture, you don't need a tent. You just put your bag together, you go out into the bush, and you just find yourself sleeping in a hut because there's bunks and there's places to store, prepare your food, and it's just a nice little backcountry culture that happens here. Because it's such a part of our culture, tourism that come here want to experience that too, and it's very, very cheap. Typical hut costs $5 a night. For the really, really popular huts, it can be as high as $40-50 a night. And there's some really popular trails, or what we call tracks here in New Zealand, that are constantly packed during the summer. And so now for some of these international tourists, these hut prices are going to cost $140 a night on the most popular tracks. This is the same price as a probably moderate to nice hotel room. And these people are paying to sleep out in a hut that has some solar-powered lights, that has a wooden bunk that you put your sleeping bag on, and it's essentially it's someplace that's inside and insulated. So if it's wet and cold outside, you can be warm and dry inside. But this also brings up a bit of a controversy, because Kiwis don't like paying for what they think are public provisions, things that they feel entitled to. But at the same time, the Department of Conservation is struggling to maintain all of these backcountry tourist facilities. So some number figures in the financial year 2015-2016, the Department of Conservation, we call them DOC for short, spent $143 million to manage tourism on their properties. They only received $33 million in revenue from tourism. So a lot of this funding that they're receiving from the central government that should be going towards maintaining the land, maintaining the wildlife, improving conservation initiatives is actually going straight into tourism, because DOC is struggling to keep up with the demand. Over the last 10 years, the increase in tourists visiting these national parks and other places is increasing 10% each year. Essentially, in the last 5 years, the number of tourists to some of our best national parks like Fiordland and Tongariro and Abel Tasman has doubled, and they're predicted to double again in the next 6 years. And essentially, DOC is struggling on how to take care of this. So some of the things they're considering is, do they put a levy on every international tourist coming into the country at the border? Do they charge parking fees at all the car parks at the parks? Is there an entry fee? I know in the US and in Australia and many other countries, they charge an entry fee to get into their national parks. Do they limit the number of visitors that come into the park? So they're going to say, all right, on this track, there's only 2,000 people a day. Once we've hit that number, that's it. No one else can come in. So these are some of the things they're throwing up into the air. The hardest part about doing all of this is that the New Zealand government is really good about strategy and about planning and about saying, okay, this is what we predict, so this is where we're going to put our investment into it. But here's the other thing, is that tourists, generally, they'll put a lot of plans into getting here, but once they get here, they'd like to be flexible. And everybody wants to get that perfect picture. They want to go to that perfect scenery. And so what's happened is they call it the Instagram effect, which I'm sure it happens everywhere else in the world, where a single Instagram photo that's put online and becomes viral can suddenly drive thousands of people to go visit a brand new location that lacks any facilities, that lacks any ability to handle large numbers of cars or any large number of tourists. And this has happened in a location called Roy's Peak down on the South Island. It's this very steep 2-hour climb up to the top of this mountain ridge. And then when you get up there, you basically have this large mountainous view with this giant lake, and it makes this perfect Instagram photo that everybody likes to take. I had a chance to go up there 2 years ago. It was a very strenuous hike, but when I got up there, man, the view was beautiful. But I waited 20 minutes to get a picture.
Yeah.
On the heaviest days of visitors, somebody can expect to wait at least an hour or more to stand in line to get their picture on this ridge line that shows that they're in this unspoiled wilderness when in fact there's 100 people right behind them waiting in line for this picture. And this happens all the time in New Zealand. Someone takes this great Instagram photo, and then suddenly everybody shifts over to that place to get that same exact photo, and it's nuts how fast it works.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, living here too, it is an industrialized nation, but it's just, there's only 4.5 million people here, and it's a huge country. It's about the size of the East Coast of the United States, right? Mm-hmm. Between the North and South Island. So, but we don't have the facilities, the road network. I mean, there's no highways. I mean, they're building one now, and when you get to Auckland, there's some semblance of a highway, but
it's not like you see
when we go out.
Yeah.
No. And you're from the States, so we go out to Raglan, and then we're going along the coast, and it's this windy little tiny dirt road. Mm-hmm. So, and I actually share that picture. I think I'm going to share it again on Instagram. I shared it on Facebook, but from, looking out at the ocean, beautiful view, but yeah, there's no way the car park could park 12 cars. That was it.
Yeah. That's all it's supposed to handle. Yeah.
Yeah. So New Zealand, I mean, please come visit. It's a beautiful country. It's amazing. It's got to be on everybody's bucket list, but yeah, I could just imagine.
Yeah, and right now, the country as a whole, not everybody that comes to New Zealand goes to the national parks, but there's about 4.5 million people in New Zealand. Over 1 million people visit as tourists every year. That's about 25% of the entire country is increased,
right?
Just from tourists alone. And they're looking at seeing that double in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So almost where half, well, actually, if you do the math, a third of the people in New Zealand would technically be tourists in a given year's time.
Yeah.
It is quite crazy if you think of it that way.
Yeah. It reminds me of Yosemite, because when I was doing my master's degree in Central California, I was like an hour away, and so we would go to Yosemite all the time. But it is it's insane. It's one of the most beautiful places on Earth, very picturesque, but it is bumper to bumper traffic. Every spot has thousands of people taking pictures. I can imagine it's just crazy now. And, but I think Yosemite was starting, this was, 2 decades ago almost, or 15 years ago. So I think they were limiting the amount of people coming into the parks.
Yeah, I know when I was there, they had shuttles going through. So they forced people to park at a central location. If you want to go anywhere else, you had to go on the shuttle. And so that limited some of the cars. But this has a profound effect on the conservation initiatives that these places are trying to have.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, in the valley, come on. I mean, wildlife, no, it's people are everywhere. It's pretty crazy. And then also, just say, supporting DOC or, the parks and recreation and everything, fish and wildlife in the United States and other countries. You should never feel bad about having to pay to go to a national park or support national parks, because government funding, this is one of the first things they start cutting. Before they cut more important services. So, we'll have to keep our eye on that and see what happens of it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's certainly something that's New Zealand's not immune to it, and neither is any other country.
No. All right, Jesse. How do I want to do this? I'm going to play you a sound.
Okay.
And then I want you to guess what it is. So let me set it up for you.
Right.
I'm going to play it one more time.
All right. I heard some birds in the background. Wow. All right. It kind of sounded mechanical. It was like a buzzing sound, almost like some type of, I don't know, weed eater, or was it a drone? I know drones have been a hot topic.
No, that was a giraffe.
It wasn't humming. A drone? That was a giraffe. No. A giraffe. No way.
Giraffe. Now, have you not heard that? You were like with your Okapi?
I've heard a lot of sounds come out of giraffes and Okapi, but that's not a sound I've heard come out of them.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Okay, and even at the giraffes at the Hamilton Zoo. Okay. So that is a giraffe humming.
Wow.
So this just came out this week. It was published on Nova, the NOVA website. So, and for all listeners, we put all these links on our show notes of the news program for the week on the website. So you can go read these stories on your own, or you can listen to this humming. But researchers have found that giraffes hum to each other throughout the night, and their zookeepers never noticed. So I brought this up especially for you because in your interview, again, if you haven't listened to Jesse's interview about okapi, please do. It's amazing. And, you were talking about the infrasound and how the baby would make a noise, and the next thing you didn't even know it made the noise. The next thing you know, mom's right behind you.
Yeah, all the only indication I would get is that the ear movement on the animal itself.
Right.
The way they moved their ears was atypical when they had to have been producing a sound, and mom would be right there at the door.
Like, oh, hey, it's okay, Mama, I promise.
Right on cue.
Yeah. So they think giraffes, like elephants, produce infrasonic or ultra low sounds that are below our range of hearing. So, you can set up sound equipment that it will pick up, and then later you can amplify it and all these things. So the University of Vienna, they gathered 947 hours of giraffe noises over 8 years. So talk about needing some AI, right, to help.
AI, right there. That shows the need for it.
Oh, I couldn't even imagine. That's crazy, an 8-year study. And what they found was at night, the giraffes, they had this, it says it right here, harmonic and sustained humming that varied in frequency. So it was, on average, 92 hertz, which is below our really low side, or we can't hear it. So, they knew, they don't understand the behavior yet. They're still researching this. I guess it's going to be a 20-year study, but.
Wow.
They don't know what they're saying yet, but
yeah.
But I thought it was kind of cool. Like, I was just like, I remember Jesse was talking about the okapis and things like that. So, thanks for playing along with that, Jerome.
No worries. That definitely blew my mind because there's different. Obviously, all animals make different types of sounds, and there are certain animals that are known for a particular sound. But even those animals have a different range. They have different sounds for different ways of communicating. So it would make sense that giraffes have a lot more to say than what we think they have to say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like you said, hopefully maybe AI can step in and help us understand some of these things better because...
They'll shorten that study down to a couple years.
Yeah. I mean, but imagine that's what's crazy about technology. Just imagine how much more we can do. So... it's like we always think, the world's a horrible place. We're going down the tubes, blah, blah, blah. We're actually making innovations left and right that I think are going to save our rears in the end, hopefully, knock on wood. All right.
Totally.
So, there was no other big stories this week. There's some stuff on climate change. There was nothing else that kind of caught my eye, but I did find new species. What did you find this week? One of the new species.
I cheated a bit.
Okay.
So in some ways this is a new species. In other ways we've known about this animal for over 100 years. What I discovered, I'm a bird watcher, a bit like Angie, but I keep a life list of all the animals I've seen, just because I want to keep a record. I have a hard time remembering anyway. And so I spent a year in Australia, and I traveled all over the country, and I saw over 400 species of bird. And some of my favorite birds that I saw are called fairy wrens. If you haven't, most people haven't seen anyone before unless you're from Australia. They're these tiny little birds. They're not true wrens, but the males have some of the most beautiful plumage in the world. There's blues and purples and oranges and reds depending on the species. And so fairy wrens I'm absolutely in love with. And I found out earlier this year that a species of fairy wren had been split. They split it in half. Now, obviously, they didn't split the fairy wren in half physically, but what happened is someone did a molecular analysis of the species because there's been a lot of debate on this particular species called the variegated fairy wren, in which there's several different subspecies. They've got a lot of variation, but no one's been able to pinpoint what exactly defines the species itself. And so someone took a chance and did all this analysis and realized that all the variegated fairy wrens along the east coast, so east of the long mountain range in Australia called the Great Dividing Range, were a separate species from all the other variegated fairy wrens that were inland and that were on the other side of the mountain range. And there was actually quite a rift in terms of the genetics between these two populations. And so thus, earlier this year, some of the ornithological bodies, global bodies, have decided that the species will be split in half. All the birds on the eastern side of the mountains will be the variegated fairy wrens, and all the birds on the other side, to the west, inland, will be purple-backed fairy wrens.
Okay.
And so thus I had what we call in the bird watching world an armchair tick.
Okay.
Essentially, I sat at home and I have another species on my life list because I saw this animal in both places.
Yeah.
I've technically seen both species, but at the time which I saw them, they were both one species.
Right.
Yeah, so now I've got an extra bird on my list. And now it's been confirmed that there's two separate species. Now with this purple-backed fairy wren, there's still a bit more debate. It's considered a polytypic species. Mm-hmm. So that means that there are actually further plumage or different type of diversity characteristics within the species that gets divided up in the subspecies. So there's still the potential for this purple-backed fairy wren to be split in even more species if further analysis allows.
Oh, cool. Well, genetics has really helped us quite a bit, as far as,
it's changed taxonomy immensely.
Yeah.
It messes up all the textbooks people have. As soon as you buy a textbook with genetic analysis, it's out of date in 5 years.
Oh, yeah. Like all my textbooks from college are so long. It's like last century science almost in genetic field. You couldn't keep up with it. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Just like, the Tapalui orangutan, they just identified those guys as a separate species due to DNA. This week, we covered the camels, the Bactrian camels. DNA evidence, again, has shown the wilds are completely different than the domestics. So, the genetics it's amazing where we've gone with it.
So these animals are in front of us all the time. We just don't realize how diverse they really are until we start looking a bit deeper.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a couple questions real quick.
Uh-huh.
What is the most obscure bird that you want to see, and what is, besides these fairy wrens, what is the one bird that you were just like, wow, when you saw it?
All right, the most obscure bird, it belongs in its own family. There's only two species like it. They're found in very remote part of Africa. They're called a rock fowl.
Okay.
They're very, very hard to find. I would probably end up spending a few $1,000s, if not more, trying to put together a trip just to see this one species. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the most obscure bird that is on my wish list to see one day. And they're absolutely fantastic birds if you get a chance to look them up.
Okay.
And what was the second question?
So what's the one bird you've seen that was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I saw that?
Oh, there's actually a handful of that, but the one that probably took the most effort the first time I saw it, and I was just taken aback, was the albatross.
Yeah.
I lucked out. I was traveling around Australia on this little side trip I was doing, and I happened to check into this hostel. And the woman checking me in said, "Oh, what are you here for?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just bird watching the area." She's like, "Oh, are you taking the boat tour tomorrow?" And I'm thinking, boat tour? Wait a minute.
Okay.
We're right next to the ocean. This is a pelagic trip. And she's like, "Oh, there's a whole heap of guys here that are going on this boat tomorrow." And she put me in contact with one of them, and sure enough, they had a spot left on the boat.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so I paid out my $500-$600, however much it was. It was not money I really could afford at the time, but the thought of going on a boat into the pelagic waters of Australia, I don't think I'd have another opportunity because this was a hard boat to get on. Everybody wanted to be on this boat. And I got out there and we saw 4 species of albatross. And so this is, in my mind, everything I'd heard about albatross, they're only really far out at sea. They're really hard to get out there. You got to go on these really long boat trips. And here I was just thrown into this adventure at the last minute. And I finally got to see this bird that I thought I would never see in my entire life. Not realizing I would move to New Zealand and you can see them from the beach.
But, I know.
But at the time, just having them, and the way they go out there and search for the birds is that they take a bunch of fish guts, essentially, that fishermen have left over. and they just toss the fish guts off the side of the boat, waiting for these birds to come in, and they'll come in and eat these fish leftovers.
Right,
and so
right.
you have this bird that's essentially the size of me, just sitting in the water right off the boat, and it's just incredible
Amazing,
how close you can get to them, and how amazing they are, and how beautiful they are when they fly. And that's probably that's the one.
I know that's definitely on our list. We'll definitely cover them at some point.
I need to get you on a boat soon.
I know.
There's plenty
of
them around New Zealand.
I know. I definitely. Well, I want to see the emperor penguin in Antarctica. So
wow, that's a trip to take.
I'll have to get down there one day.
Yeah, that's a lot of snowshoe walking.
Yeah. So, anyways, real quick. So I found, and I thought this was perfect. That went with what we talked about last week. In China, these giant salamanders, and basically I talked about last week.
All right. Yeah.
The locals there are eating them to extinction. Well, comes to find out there's actually 5 different species of these giant salamander.
No way.
Just this week in current biology.
Everything.
Yeah. That is not one species, but at least 5. These things can weigh more than 60 kilograms. That's like 120, 130 pounds. That thing's huge.
It's essentially a salamander the size of a small human.
They're huge. My kids aren't even that big. Oh my God, they're enormous. But these salamanders are in the 3 primary rivers in China. They're stuck in these river systems. So, and even with the Yangtze River dolphin, the pollution, the damming up, all the things that's happening there. So, China's got a big uphill climb with protecting wildlife in wild places. But, these ones, now that there's 5, so I'm sure they're all critically endangered, if not more so. Now, I know some of the species, they can't even find them. So, it's this luxury food that people eat, and they're just going to eat them into extinction. But, I thought it was interesting that they now, again, like you said, DNA analysis, and they're able to identify 5 different ones when they thought there was only 1. So, anyways, that's kind of what was going on this week in conservation. Some of the big stories. Jesse, thanks for filling in again.
Oh, no worries, mate. Anytime.
Yeah. No, I will. I'll talk to Angie and see. Because she's busy with the kids and everything else. So,
who do I send the invoice to?
Her.
All right, I'll send it to Angie.
Gainesville, Florida. Go send it off to back home to her. Yeah, no, maybe I'll get an episode where it's just you and her talking. That would be interesting for me.
Yeah.
Give
you a break.
I'll throw it out to her. I'll throw it out to her and see what she says. But anyways, thanks, mate, and I'm sure I'll see you in a couple days.
Sounds good, dude. All right.
Thanks for joining us, and take care. For the listeners, stay tuned. Next week, another species. We actually have a really good interview. We're excited for next week. It's going to be really great. We'll be back next Friday with more news. So take care.